Hi everyone, welcome to our Global READ program. This program is brought to you by the Charter for Compassion. We're a not-for-profit organization whose main mission is to promote the Golden Rule through compassionate action. We appreciate your donations so that we can continue to bring you programs like this and those we offer through the Charter's Education Institute and so much more. The Charter for Compassion has over 440 compassionate cities in 54 countries and over 2,200 organizational partners. To donate, you can go to our website at charterforcompassion.org. Before we get started today with our program, I want to announce a couple of upcoming events the Charter for Compassion is providing for you. We have an amazing slate of authors started for our 2020 Global READ program. And starting in January, we're being visited with by Professor Paul Gilbert, and he will be discussing his book, Living Like Crazy. And then in February, another book we're sure this audience will enjoy reading and learning about is Earth Emotions. Author Glenn Elbrecht will be with us from the UK. Our guest host for that program will be Susan DeGaia, who herself will be teaching an online course through the Charter Education Institute around the grief we're experiencing with the condition of our planet. So I'll be putting links in the chat room throughout this program to provide you more information about these programs. And speaking of the chat room, it's located on the bottom of your screen. That's that little bubble with the 3 dots. You can put any questions that you might have for our guests today. And I'm going to take this time right now shortly to introduce, but I want to mention one more program that's coming up that is related to our program today. We have a new project launching on the first day of spring. We already have some pilot projects in the works. It's called the Compassion Tree Project. And this project will directly impact 11 of the proposed plans to reverse global warming outlined in Drawdown, and then also indirectly impact many of the others. Again, I'll provide you with a link about that in the chat room. So you already know where the chat room is. Please ask any questions as they come to you throughout the program so that we're not trying to figure out how many we have at the end, and I can get those to Katharine at the end of our program. So we are so pleased to have 2 hosts with us for our program today. Please welcome Marguerite Chandler. She's a Quaker activist, mentor, social entrepreneur, and an intro to Drawdown facilitator. Welcome, Marguerite.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
And then we also have Kristen Wilkinson, a wildlife and nature advocate. She's a student of shamanic practices and an intro to Drawdown facilitator herself. Welcome, Kristen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
And of course, our special guest, Dr. Katharine Wilkinson, senior writer of Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. Dr. Katharine Wilkinson is an author, strategist, and teacher working to heal the planet we call home. She is Vice President of Communication and Engagement at the nonprofit Project Drawdown and was the lead writer of Drawdown, the New York Times bestseller on climate solutions. The Boston Globe dubbed Katharine's first book, Between God and Green, a vitally important, even subversive story for its exploration of climate change and evangelical Christianity. Known for her work at the intersection of climate, gender equality, and women's leadership, Katharine's TED Talk on the topic has more than 1.5 million views. She currently advises on Mary Robinson's feminist climate podcast, Mothers of Invention, and is co-editing an anthology of women's climate wisdom with Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. In 2019, Time featured Katharine as one of the 15 women who will save the world. She speaks, moderates, and facilitates across diverse forums, including National Geographic, Skoll World Forum, and the United Nations. Katharine holds a doctorate in geography and environment from Oxford, where she was a Rhodes Scholar and resides in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Katharine, and thanks so much for being here. I'm going to let you ladies take it from here.
Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kate. Right. So Katharine, Marguerite, and I, as it was said in the intro, have been volunteer Drawdown, introduction to Drawdown facilitators. So we both are really excited and committed to Drawdown and spreading the word. So we're both really honored and happy to meet you and talk to you today. We thought we'd just begin with a really general question to let you dive into a bit of your story around this book. So as Kate said, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. It's quite a title. And tell us, just to start us off, how and when did you get involved in this process of writing this book, Drawdown?
Sure. Well, thank you for kicking us off, Kristen, and Kate, thank you for the kind words. So I am kind of a bit of a hopeless interdisciplinarian. So I've had a very kind of zigzaggy and windy path, but sort of environmentalism, sustainability, and a focus on climate has really run through it for the last 20 years. And most immediately before coming to Project Drawdown, I was in a funny little consulting firm that was something like Aristotle meets Dr. Seuss for business, trying to help them think about their reason for being in the world beyond making money, and how to live that. And one of my clients was the company Interface. Interface happens also to live here in Atlanta, Georgia, or its headquarters do. It's a carpet tile manufacturing company, but in the mid-90s, Interface's founder and then CEO had what he called a spear in the chest moment and sent them on a path to having zero environmental impact. And you make carpet from petroleum. So this is a really, this was a very bold thing. How in the world would we do this? Well, Ray Anderson was his name, and he brought together, a group over the years, kind of groups of thinkers and advisors on sustainability and climate. Janine Benyus, who's on our board at Project Drawdown, and also Paul Hawken, who was one of the founders of Project Drawdown. So I ended up connecting with Project Drawdown, the organization, through the work that I was doing with Interface. Ray had passed away some years prior to this project, and we were helping them kind of codify their values and their purpose, which Ray had very much been the keeper of, right? How do you sustain these things, as they were entering this era where there were lots of employees who'd never known him, never met him. So at that time, Project Drawdown, which for those who don't know is a small nonprofit organization, and the research that is a core of our work, had been underway for, I think, at least 2 years. But there was an impending book deadline, and no one had started writing. So, and it just so happened that I was kind of itchy to leave consulting. I had published my PhD research as a book a few years prior, and was thinking about kind of how to do more writing and teaching and sort of thought leadership, for lack of a better word, but not getting stuck in the narrow silos of academia. So I felt very lucky to have this intersecting of paths, and to come on board and try to take a bunch of sort of wonky research and supplement it and bring to life technologies and practices that can often feel so dry, even though they are really anything but, because they intersect with our history, with culture, with human rights, with so many fascinating and important dimensions of human life. So that's that.
Wow.
Thanks so much. A lucky happenstance that you were available to write when it was desperately needed.
You know what, Marguerite, I hadn't thought about this in a long time, but because of your Quaker background, right before this opportunity sort of crystallized, I'd been on retreat with Parker Palmer. So I always very much feel like I don't know, there are sort of Quaker origins actually to this job and this work.
Yeah, there's a principle that says, let your life speak. I would say your life speaks loudly. So my question is, if the purpose of the book is to get humanity to draw down carbon from the atmosphere, what does drawdown mean? And what was the process for identifying solutions, and how were they vetted?
Sure. Yeah, so drawdown is where we take our name from. It is actually sort of a wonky term. It means the point in time when the rising concentration of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere, which of course are what are causing our planet to warm and causing the climate changes that we're already seeing. The point when that concentration actually stops rising and begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. Well, I was with a journalist recently who was like, I mean, I didn't even know that was allowed. And, you know, I think it's worth digging in a little bit, right, to kind of, okay, if we're not just going to stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, then we've also got to be doing something that helps us hold down carbon. So I think about, you know, if you want to get to drawdown, there are these sort of two arrows. The one that goes up, you know, we want to zero that out. And also we want to be doing all that we can to support, protect, enhance carbon sinks, right? The processes in nature, primarily photosynthesis, that actually can help bring us back into balance with the planet's living systems and bring a bunch of that carbon that doesn't belong up there back here into plants and biomass and especially soil. And what was the oh, right, how did we, right, okay. So yeah, so I think it's helpful, you know, it's helpful if you want to think about solutions, it's helpful to start with the sources of the problem. And also to understand these two dynamics, right, of sources of emissions, which we need to reduce and ultimately stop, and then also sinks for carbon, land waste, but also some in the ocean. And how do we do everything that we can on both sides of that equation? And Drawdown has a laser focus on technologies and practices that are already in hand, right? These are things that we have, they're proven, we have good research about them, good data about the impact that they can have on greenhouse gases. So we were looking at solutions across all of the sectors where you have sources of emissions, and we still are. We're continuing to add to the family, if you will, and then also, right, solutions that work on the sinks side of the equation, and there's some really cool crossover actually between those two when you get into the world of land and agriculture and ecosystems. So a solution that already exists and is proven was kind of the most critical thing. And then we also wanted to understand, you know, is it something that we can put numbers around at Project Drawdown? You know, I actually might not have quite given the book the subtitle that it has. It feels a little bravado-y to me, but Drawdown is actually a very exhaustive list, but it's not actually a comprehensive list. If you think about the things that we know are powerful climate solutions, but it's hard to put a number to them, right? Things like, you know, sharing exchanges so that we reduce our consumption, right? If we think about things like reducing wealth inequality so that you don't have this dynamic where the 10% richest people on the planet are producing 50% of the consumption related emissions. So there are some things that, right, it's very hard to put numbers to. So we were focusing on those things that could be measured could be modeled in this meta-analysis that our research team did. And then we also wanted to think about things that had you know, kind of either a business case or a social impact case, right? Things that were not so outrageously expensive that they would never, you know, that they were implausible or would never sort of pay for themselves over time. So, you know, you can start to get a sense that a lot of what was sitting in the back of our mind was not, oh, what are the someday maybe shiny silver bullets that someone in Silicon Valley might figure out, right? These are what's here, what's now, what's proven, and what is already working somewhere on the planet today. It's just not reaching the scale that it could have or needs to have to be a drawdown solution. And then we have had these wonderful cohorts of research fellows who go in and do a deep kind of literature review around solutions, right? So what is all the peer-reviewed academic literature and UN reports and think tank reports? What can we learn about this solution? And then begin to use the kind of Excel-based analytical tools that were developed to actually start to put numbers to things and see, you know, do these solutions that we think are solutions, do they actually kind of meet those criteria? Great. And I should say, and just in case I forget to say it, we are really excited. We're going to be releasing some updated analysis in late February as kind of I'm excited, a very sort of distilled publication, which I think should be really useful for things like the Introduction to Drawdown course, but helpful, you know, for lots of folks who may not go into, you know, into the full detail of something like the book. You know, if Drawdown the book is sort of the trees in the forest, this will be sort of, you know, pulling up into the forest and sort of synthesizing a bit more. So we're excited about that.
Great.
Great. So Katharine, that's what you just mentioned was actually something I was going to ask next. So maybe just a little more detail that I had read, just what you had shared, that all of the Drawdown solutions research has been updated, and you'll be releasing you know, a new Drawdown 2020 solutions guide in February. Is that something you can give us a preview of? I know people that I've been involved in workshops with, in Drawdown workshops, they often have that question, like, okay, the book came out in 2017. Where are we at in, you know, the progress on this 30-year time frame of implementing solutions? Is there anything you can share about that, or should we wait for February?
Sure. Well, I can share a few things. So we've had, you know, our research team has continued to, you know, hunker down and plug away at their work, bringing in, you know, new data, refined assumptions about, right, how much can these solutions scale over the next 3 decades? Really, what is that going to cost? Really, how much money might that, in most cases, save? So they've been hard at work on that. We've added a few new solutions, and we'll continue to do that. So we're going to kind of transition into, I think, more of a sort of rolling release of analysis and updates. So when we release this work in February, there will still be things that are in process. So we'll just be looking forward to the next kind of, you know, you can think of it more as a review, you know, like these sort of annual reviews that come out. It may be sort of more like that. John Foley is our executive director, and just a wonderful, brilliant climate scientist by training. He worked very deep on land and food systems for, I think he was in academia for about 20 years. And So John and I have been working on kind of a revised framework for how we present the work, kind of organized around this, the sort of sources and sinks, and understanding, right, that there's crossover between those things, but it's very helpful for folks to have sort of clarity on these two different functions. And I've been writing kind of narratives about each of the sectors, which we did not have in Drawdown. So really hoping that it'll be a really useful tool for folks like Marguerite and Kristen who have been deep in Drawdown, but it'll also be really useful for folks who have never encountered Drawdown, and could go through this document and kind of get up to speed relatively quickly. So that's where we are.
Great. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, there are so many exotic and complex ideas about what to do about global warming, like building shipping towers halfway to the moon so we can leave the planet, or seeding the ocean surface with copper to make it more reflective. So why is it so much easier to imagine the end of the world or these kind of exotic, bizarre solutions than it is to look at the possibility of our working successfully together?
It's such a good question, and one that I think I scratch my head about a lot. So I will sort of share some musings, but I don't think I have a complete answer. It makes me laugh because just last week, TED announced a big climate initiative called Countdown, and Jimmy Kimmel tweeted out about why he's involved with Countdown, or he got on. I think he actually got on video and shared, and he said, I'm committed to Countdown because Mars sounds terrible. Right? And it's like, I definitely don't want to live on Mars. Mars doesn't seem good. And Kate Marvel, the climate scientist, likes to remind us that this is the only planet with whiskey. So,
and chocolate,
and coffee. And moss. I don't want to go anywhere where there's not moss. But when you actually go sort of looking for positive, even sort of utopian visions of the future, we don't have very many of them for any set of circumstances or any dimensions of human life. I don't know if folks saw, I think this was maybe back in August or even earlier in the summer. There was a video that came out through The Intercept that Naomi Klein worked on, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that was sort of looking 30 years in the future back at what had happened with the Green New Deal. And it struck me that it was such an unusual piece of climate communication, because we don't have very many, sort of aspirational visions that are also, it wasn't Pollyanna, right? It also said really hard things happened, right? Miami really suffered, right? And so I think part of it is just that it is, I think it's a lot of work to hold the bad news and the possibility all at once. I think so often about one of the things that I learned from Parker Palmer about this idea of the tragic gap, which is sort of where we spend our days when we work on social justice or climate justice, that we are sort of looking headlong at the reality of now and the hard things that could be, and in some cases almost certainly will be. And also we're cultivating the vision, right? And the tragic gap is this fraught and hard place to be. And it's really easy to be spit out on one side into kind of starry-eyed optimism, or spit out on the other into, despair and cynicism. And so this is where he talks about the work before the work, right? It takes work to stay in the tragic gap and to stay with this polarity. And I think, you know, that is, uncertainty is so much with us in this work. It's also, it's really interesting. It's one of the areas where I think the Sunrise movement, you know, which is one of the main youth climate organizations now in the US, they're really looking back to various points of history, including the original New Deal, to understand, right, what was done that sort of made this work. And one of the things that they have honed in on is there was so much public art and muraling about what the future might look like, could look like under a New Deal. And there were these murals in cities all over the country and towns all over the country. And Alex is the guy who's kind of the creative director, or I'm not sure what his title is with Sunrise, but he talks about kind of, you know, grounded utopian visioning as the left's antidote to the conspiracy theories of the right. And I think that is just so fascinating. And I think art can be such a powerful way to transport us, to give us visuals. We were in a workshop together and he was saying, you know, think about it, when developers are coming in and they're going to build a new thing on this block and they start to put up, right, they put up big posters, you know, big billboards of what this is going to look like. And you start to just, that seeps into your consciousness, right? And you start to think, right, this is what this is going to look like. And so I thought, this is really on to something, I think. But I think the other thing is that it is sort of scary to be hopeful. I think it is scary to let yourself imagine possibility, because it might just be yanked out from under us, right? We may not come together in the way that we need to manifest it. And I think, you know, I think maybe there's sort of a self-protectionism, right? And kind of, I don't know, staving off the possible heartbreak, or the even deeper heartbreak. I don't know. I'm curious what others think about that as well.
Katharine, and that phrase "tragic gap," I think it's really right on, and it reminded me of, I heard you say in a TED talk I was listening to the other day, the phrase about, right, it breaks our heart, right? The extinction and destruction and devastation of the planet breaks our heart. And you also used the phrase, there's a heart broken and then there's a heart broken wide open. And that how different it is to take action or approach a problem with, I'm going to be in this place of my heart broken wide open, you know, not shutting down because my heart is broken and I can't continue. And that's, yeah, it's a lot of what this is, you know, that encapsulates. I wanted to then talk a bit, draw down into this, because my experience has been in giving these introduction to drawdown workshops is how transformative learning about drawdown is for people on not just a mental or an intellectual level, a heart level. And I just most recently convened a workshop here in Pátzcuaro, Mexico, just a few days ago with a group of people. And I like to do at the beginning of the workshop a little ritual where I have everybody in the workshop go around and say one word of how they feel about global warming. This is before, you know, we've learned anything about drawdown. And inevitably the words are things like scared, upset, concerned, anxious, angry, you know, gloomy, depressed. Then we have the workshop and learn more about drawdown and the possibility of reversing global warming and the solutions and how we all have a role that we can play in that. Then I do the similar ritual at the end. How are you feeling now? And the words are always completely transformed. And they're things like hopeful, energized, encouraged, motivated, excited.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to use that to kind of pose this question from your perspective. For people who have learned about drawdown and gotten involved, how have you seen their perspective on global warming shifts? Yeah, just addressing that in whatever way you like.
Sure. So, yeah, I think, you know, the problem statement of the climate crisis can just feel so overwhelming. And because of the nature of, particularly the nature of the media, right, what we're hearing about when we're hearing about it is generally the problem. And it does feel, I think, completely overwhelming, completely sort of flummoxing, right? How in the world can we address this? What in the world should my role be in that sort of ecosystem of transformation? If we can even dare to imagine such a thing. And I think, what really, if you boil it down, I think that our work at Project Drawdown is really about is about sort of gathering and synthesizing humanity's collective wisdom, about solutions, about what can be done, about what we are already doing. And I think there's something that's just so overwhelming in a good way, about how much we actually do know and how much we actually can do and how many tools are actually already in the toolbox. And I think that is energizing. And you begin to see, there are footholds of action here for everyone, right? Every individual, every institution, and none of us can do it all by any stretch of the imagination, but surely there are sort of places here for each of us, for each of our organizations, maybe multiple footholds there. But I will say, Kristen, I think that that also part of what happens in the Drawdown workshops is also the experience of holding climate in community. I think that there's so little space for that, right? We are so rarely in circle and focused on the climate crisis and solutions. So I think that there's just such an incredible power of, yes, orienting to solutions without unhinging from the reality of the problem, but doing that in community. And it's just making me think, this summer, Ayanna Johnson and I co-led a retreat with 30 women climate leaders. And we did a very similar kind of one-word thing. And these are all folks who know about solutions, but people came in on fumes and burned out and heartbroken, and there was trauma and, all of the rest of it. And at the, 4 nights together, right, coming out the other side, people felt, grounded and energized and like they could dream and imagine again and sort of revved back up. So I just don't want to underestimate that. I think, the biggest sort of, magic of introduction to Drawdown is what you all do, bringing people together.
Great. So how can we use our current global warming crisis to be seen as an opportunity, not cause for despair?
Mm-hmm. So I guess just the one thing I will say is that I I do think it's cause for despair. You know, I think it's cause for grief and fear and rage and numbness and just, you know, I think it's cause for all of that. And it's actually one of the things that I've really, I've come to appreciate so much about, particularly sort of, call it women's leadership, more conventionally feminine leadership, in the climate space of making space for holding all of it, right? That all of these things are welcome. And at the same time, you know, I think it is our work to, you know, to be imagining those possibilities. And the work of Beth Sawin at Climate Interactive, who was a PhD student of Donella Meadows. She's a great systems thinker. And for those on Twitter, I feel like she constantly is writing a thread that is like exactly the thing that I needed to hear, you know, in that moment or that day. But Beth works with this concept of multi-solving, right? So how can we solve for more near-term, immediate, palpable human needs at the same time as we're solving for this longer-term, right, aspiration of reducing emissions and reaching drawdown? And I think that's exactly the right way to think about this, right? And how we build energy around solutions. Well, when they're solutions for multiple things, right? When they're not just solutions for greenhouse gas emissions, but they're solutions for health and well-being. They're solutions for human rights. They're solutions for making more, you know, livable and vibrant cities and urban spaces. When they're solutions for creating a more resilient and nourishing food system, right? I think that's when you start to see kind of the magnetism, right, rise, and those kind of multi-solving opportunities, or those co-benefits, you know, in sort of dry climate language. They're always there, but I think so often we forget to bring them to life, or to talk about them, or we're so focused on greenhouse gases that we sort of ignore actually the things that people may care more about in this moment or for their community. And so I think kind of having that in, you know, the kind of, I don't know, like bifocal lenses, right? Of like the near term and immediate, the things, the impacts, the positive impacts that people can really touch and feel, and benefit from around solutions, and this longer term piece. And I think that's, you know, I think that way of thinking is very much embedded in the ideas of the Green New Deal. I think it's very much embedded in a lot of the kind of approaches and discourses that youth activists are bringing to this conversation. So I think it's been to me a really notable shift in the last couple of years, that I think we're hearing more of that. And also we're hearing other folks say, no, we can't think about all those things. We have to only think about emissions, which, you know, is what we have done, you know, what we've done in the climate movement for 30 or 40 years, and it has not worked very well.
Well, I hate to interrupt this because this has been so amazing so far, but we have so many questions from the audience. So I'd like to just post some of them. It seems as though a couple of them have been answered with some of your comments. So if that's not the case, please ask the question again. But Tarsha asked, what do you see as the best way of getting these solutions implemented, and how do we get consumers on board?
So, this is a great question, because it's one of the things we haven't talked about. So I find it really helpful to think about solutions, which in Drawdown speak are, practices or technologies that actually do the greenhouse gas emissions work. And then accelerators, which are all our various levers for moving those solutions forward. And, so we'll hear from folks sometimes, well, like, why didn't you put a carbon tax in Drawdown? Well, because in our kind of framework, a carbon tax is not a solution, it's an accelerator for solutions, right? Any kind of policy mechanisms are accelerators for solutions. Movements of capital, right? Whether that's government investment, private investment, philanthropy, movement of money into solutions, right, is a way of accelerating them. I think we have often in the climate world underestimated the importance of shifting culture, and through vision and stories and sort of paradigms. I think in other kind of maybe social justice spaces, there's more clarity that culture almost always leads politics, right? That political change almost always fills the space that cultural change opens up for it. I mean, this is very much what happened in South Africa with the end of apartheid, right? That, Kumi Naidoo talks about kind of owning the songs, owning the art, owning the stories, and that is what kind of opened up the horizon of change and possibility. And I think sometimes conservatives understand that maybe better than liberals or folks on the left. I think they have much more clarity that this is a cultural struggle in some sense. So I think all of that to say, and I'm happy to, I don't know if there's a way to share, Kate, kind of a distilled framework of what these accelerators are. This will be part of, I'll pull this into our February publication. So maybe just keep an eye out for that. But all of that to say that, now you've got all of the possible solutions and you've got all these other, sort of levers for change in the accelerator space. And part of the reason why we didn't try to match all of those up in Drawdown and say, well, these are all the accelerators for solar, is because, whoa, first of all, that becomes very unwieldy very quickly, but also they are very context dependent, right? So the thing that might make sense in my home state of Georgia may not be the same thing that makes sense in British Columbia, right? There may be opportunities for shifting policy in places where, okay, maybe here there needs to be sort of a bleeding edge role for private capital and business. I'm just sort of pulling this out of thin air and giving an example. So I think it depends where you are, and it depends what solutions you're thinking about. And I think, the other thing I would just say on the consumer piece, I think the environmental movement has treated us as primarily consumers for way too long. And I think we are primarily civic beings. We are primarily, community beings, not buyers of goods and services. Yes, there are certainly things that we can do as consumers, but I think that's actually sometimes where the kind of blockaders of progress want us to stay put, right? It's been very interesting to me that fossil fuel companies have started to put, advertisements on social media like, well, what's your carbon footprint? Right? That they want us to be operating in this little individualized, my life, my choices space, because we're not very powerful there. I think about those individual choices and behaviors as being kind of a place to get grounded in our values, and to feel like, we're taking tangible action of some kind every day, but ultimately, they should be on-ramps and catalysts for collective action. We could be the best darn consumers on the planet for the next 10 years, and we are not going to solve this situation. We have to have global climate emissions this decade. That means we have to build power, and we have to do that through collective action.
Thank you. I know you mentioned that we should feel despair and we should feel all these different, what we would call negative, sort of feelings. But to sort of piggyback on that, Rosanna asked, where do you, Katharine, find your own greatest source of hope on this topic?
So I have an increasingly kind of fraught relationship with the word hope, because I think it feels a little bit to me sort of like, what side of the bed did I wake up on? But I have deep passion for the notions of courage and determination. So I think, you don't necessarily have to actively feel hopeful to be able to tap into a sense of determination or a sense of courage. And so that's actually been a really helpful kind of shift for me, because, there are a lot of days where hope feels a little bit ephemeral to me. But, particularly when I stay connected in communities of folks who are committed and acting, and like, damn it, we are digging in, even if this is the longest shot we've ever gone for. We are not sitting on the sidelines. We're just not going to do it. So those relationships become, I think, for me, kind of the most sustaining thing. I'm part of a monthly circle in Atlanta that is not related to climate, but that has become a really important sort of grounding and kind of nourishing space for me. Getting into, like, especially kind of big nature, but even just touching a tree, like just putting my back up against a tree, sometimes just in my, neighborhood and in the city, really helps me. And poetry has been a really important part of, kind of when I feel depleted, I will often crack open. There are a lot of Mary Oliver poetry books in that bookcase, and just to sort of reconnect with the magnificence of this planet. And I said this at the end of that TED Talk, but I really do believe, sometimes I have to kind of meditate on it for a while before I can really get back there, that it is a magnificent thing to be alive in a moment that matters as much as this moment does, not just for humanity, but indeed for all of life on Earth. And it drives me bananas when people say, like, the planet will be fine. I mean, we might go, but the planet will be fine. It's like, no, we're going to wipe out so much along the way. If that's the path we go down, it's not like humans poof away and everybody else has a party. Like, that's not what it's gonna look like, right? Already you imagine the animals who, are losing their habitat and can't migrate with their food sources, and right. I mean, this is horrible and heartbreaking stuff. So anyway, well, I also will say, like, when the despair or the grief, grief is probably my kind of primary emotion in this space, when it is, super present, also just to make the space to really, like, go there and feel it and cry and, and to sort of surrender to what is really hard, and then kind of rise back out of the heartbreak into that kind of broken openness.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you for the open and honest response to that. That's amazing. So speaking of some of that, and there's so many questions here, so I'm gonna see if I can get to as many as I can. This one's from Carolyn. She says, I am becoming so aware of the conflicting directions of our fellow humans. On the one hand, we have massive clear cutting of trees to make way for subdivisions, which happened just in my neighborhood, by the way. And speaking of that, the fox have been uh, are homeless now as a result of that, which is really sad. But to continue on with her, on the other, there seems to be an increased awareness of spiritual ecology in the works of Jacob Needleman, The Unknown World, Joanna Macy, Wendell Berry, et cetera, et cetera. Consciousness seems to be the key. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, I'm sort of with you in feeling these conflicts, right? Of feeling the ways that we are awakening to our sort of fundamental interconnectedness and more sort of bringing more kind of spiritual awareness to our ecological challenges, and also the ways that, you know, extractive capitalism and consumerism seem to just sort of march forward unabated. I mean, it is, I think it is, this is the tragic gap, right? This is that fraught space. But mostly I'll just say, I think I'm so grateful for the expansion of kind of more spiritual discourse and sharing and practice in this area. I studied religion as an undergraduate student because, you know, I felt like that was the space where you got to ask these big questions about what does it mean to be human, and a human on this planet. And you know, I think at the end of the day, the climate crisis asks us really existential questions, and I don't think we can answer those with science or policy or economics. I think they are really fundamental questions of meaning and values and beliefs, and I think we deeply need resources for that. And I think sometimes, yeah, I think that's also part of what sort of keeps people at a distance from this topic, right? Is that it does implicitly pose really hard questions to us and for us.
Yeah, for sure. So here's a very matter of fact question about the actual solutions that are there. What are the best practices to deal with refrigerants, which you have identified as the largest lever to reduce climate change? So yeah. A real practical question here.
Real practical. So let me just say one thing. So just, yes, remember that when you go drill down to the specifics of solutions, refrigerants ends up at the top of the heap, at least in this kind of most conservative scenario from our work. Sometimes I worry that has kind of occluded for folks that, like, the thing we have to do is stop burning fossil fuels, right? Like, yes, refrigerants, but when you think about all of the solutions in Drawdown that are our means of moving off of fossil fuels and onto clean and renewable sources of energy, which include like 2 feet and 2 wheels, but also, you know, efficiency in wind and solar and all of that. That is, right, I don't want us to sort of lose sight of that. Refrigerants, the trick with refrigerants, hydrofluorocarbons, is they're everywhere. They're in our air conditioning systems and our refrigerators, and leaks, and particularly how they're handled at disposal is a big issue. And I actually was talking to my HVAC guy about this, you know, a couple of months ago, and he was like, there are just a lot of folks in the industry who don't do the right thing. You know, the thing to do is make sure you're getting, kind of from an individual perspective, get these things serviced. And, you know, when it's time to, you know, I have an air conditioning unit that's going to clunk out, you know, to make sure that is disposal is handled kind of according to, you know, in the US, in this case, EPA guidelines and regulations. You know, there also, I think, are opportunities to address the kind of appliances, right, and things that may have ended up in landfills, right, not appropriately handled, right, and kind of going back and doing some of that cleanup is also a big opportunity.
Thanks. And I think we have time for this one more, maybe two, I don't know, questions. And Katharine, I know you mentioned it before, if there's a way that you can provide us with some documents or, you know, things, you can share those with me, by the way, and then we can post them on our Global Read website so that people can grab those later. This question is from Sebastian. He says, understanding that this is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, where is this plan in terms of having an international connected network working for developing these alternatives, and how can we join and help to do so?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, first is maybe, I know that sometimes like Project Drawdown can seem like this really big thing because the topics that we touch are so big, but we're actually just a tiny team of 6 people. So we're not going to be leading any kind of international network or anything like that. But you know, what I think I think of us as being kind of this, this synthesis point, right? Where there is all of this amazing work going on in the world, and we're sort of scanning that landscape, understanding it, synthesizing it, bringing that together into, you know, research and communication, and then letting that flow back out into the world. That said, there are folks all over the place who are picking up Drawdown and working with it in their own ways. The work that the Pachamama Alliance has done with the Introduction to Drawdown course is a great example. There's an exciting project that's happening here in Georgia. There's a consortium of researchers, professors across universities that are taking the global Drawdown analysis and bringing it down to the context of our state. So we will actually know what's the solution set look like for Georgia, particularly with an eye towards what can really have an impact this decade to reach this kind of critical 2030 reductions. So all that to say, I don't think there's ever going to be sort of one centralized thing. I could be proven wrong, but I think that there is this sort of beautiful, I don't know, evolving ecosystem of efforts that are happening and that our work is touching or intersecting with in small ways and large.
Thanks. Wow, there's just so many questions that we haven't had a chance to get to. Unfortunately, perhaps maybe I can send those to you via email. We could address those. But I want to just thank both Kristen and Marguerite for being amazing hosts today for our program. And most importantly, I want to thank you, Katharine, for being with us and engaging with us and answering these questions. We really appreciate your time and your heart and your wisdom in this endeavor. Kristen and Marguerite, do you have anything that you want to say before we close out?
It's been a privilege to meet you and hear you speak. I loved your TED Talk, and I'm thinking of us as the mycelium of the culture change that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That, me too, Katharine, and listening to you, and particularly this whole, all of it, you know, like the container to hold all of it, the grief, the heartbreak, and the action and the solution in community. I think that's just such a powerful, effective message to, you know, absorb in and take to heart. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kristen and Marguerite, for wonderful questions, and also participants. I'm sorry for the bounty of questions that will go unanswered, but hopefully there'll be good sparks for conversation. And Kate, thank you for being such a great wrangler of, of this conversation. It's been really wonderful.
Thank you again. And I just want to remind everybody that if they wanted to save the chat, because there's plenty of nice discussion and other questions in there, that you can do that in the bottom right-hand corner of the chat room. There's these 3 little dots. And then if you click on that, it'll say save chat. And if you save that chat, then it'll save to your computer and you can use that as a resource later. Again, thank you for being here. Go to charterforcompassion.org. For more information about all the wonderful things that we're doing in the world. And I have also put the link to Katharine's website on Drawdown in the chat room. So I know someone asked about, is there a summary of these solutions? And people want to know about if they can buy the 2020 solutions guide and all of that. So I'm sure that's answered.
It will be, you will be able to just download the 2020 document. So yes, February 20th is our hopeful date if all goes according to plan. So keep an eye out. Yeah, and if following us on social media or on our email list, you will be sure not to miss it.
All right. Thank you again. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Appreciate your time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.